My name is Ken Parker, and I've been obsessed with Archtop guitars for 46 years. And I am truly relieved to be in a place with only Archtop fanatics in it. So we don't have to use the flat top lingo, right? We're among friends. Okay, people who love the Archtop guitar. People who love the acoustic Archtop guitar. Okay, so my talk today will be about the acoustic Archtop guitar and not about other kinds of Archtop guitars, except in passing. I would like to thank Peter Henriksen and his posse for hosting this thing. It's already been, it just started 10 minutes ago and it's already great. And also Kit for providing, Kit Simon is the proprietor of the Ye Olde Pick and Parlor right around the corner, who's provided these fabulous early Archtop guitars by the Gibson Company, and also the staff at the hotel who have been uniformly delightful. So that's great. And I also like to, I have three powerful co-conspirators here in the audience that I would like to identify in order of their appearance in my work life. They are, holding the camera, Bob Martin, who handles my website and has designed all my online presence and counsels me and keeps me grounded in the digital world. Makes me look good. Thank you, Bob, for being here. Bob Palmieri, Duneland Labs in Chicago, who is good at so many things that it would take a lot of my time to list them, so I'll just leave it at that. He has been my electronics co-conspirator on and off for all this time, and for the last 6 or 7 years, has been in the throes, of which I occasionally got to participate, of developing a truly superior pickup for bronze strings, which, as everyone in this room knows, are the correct strings for an acoustic Archtop guitar. And although there are other pickups that address the balance issues of bronze strings, we never thought any of them were very good, and some of them are so giant and bulky that they simply can't be used on an acoustic Archtop guitar. So hats off to Bob. He's available for consultation by anybody. Any builders in here? Great. Okay, so any builders who are interested in sounding terrific. We didn't somehow get an amp. I wonder if there's an amp in this building. Oh, okay, great. But we could try and figure that out. Maybe afterwards we could do a quick little demo under power, okay? And let me just say that the acoustic Archtop guitar with a pickup is not an electric guitar. But an electric guitar with acoustic strings on it is not an acoustic guitar. Okay, just to make sure we're not, I mean, if you build a guitar that's designed to have nickel strings and it has a pickup on it that addresses the needs of nickel strings, like almost every pickup, then it's hard for me to consider that an acoustic guitar because it wasn't built with the bronze drivers in mind in the first place. So, okay. And then I have a disclaimer, which is that since we all make mistakes, I'm about to make a lot of them right in front of you, so please don't hate me if I say something. Hopefully I won't offend anybody, but I'll say some things that are probably wrong. Please feel free to correct me. And also, in the same vein, to just remind you that this is one man's opinion. So you're free to have a differing opinion, and we can still be friends. All right. So, to me, the acoustic Archtop guitar is the most versatile kind of guitar that can be built. And by that, I mean that a properly constructed one, and good instrument making is an exercise in balance and proportion, and has a long history as such that we can learn from. But a properly proportioned musical instrument built as an Archtop guitar can be asked to do almost any kind of music that you would play on any kind of guitar. Can stand in for nylon string music that you usually be played on nylon string guitar, could stand in for any kind of flat toppy style, anything, and should be at its best very powerful and versatile instrument with a huge range of tones available by how you handle the guitar, and also it should have a big dynamic range. Now, this is a problem for guitars. The difference in power between the loudest guitar that was ever made in the world and a regular pretty good guitar is not a big difference. Guitars are just not that loud. So we need, as musicians, some dynamic range in order to express ourselves. And most guitars are sadly quite deficient in dynamic range. There are a lot of guitars which, if you strike them with some vehemence, or we won't call it violence maybe, but if you really push them, they just sound bad. They, even if the accent's high enough so they don't rattle, they feel overdriven, they feel like unnaturally compressed, they lose their voice. And so it's important to try and build a guitar with a substantial power to it. And at the same time, since there isn't a lot of power available in an acoustic guitar, it's also equally important to design and build a guitar so that it sounds beautiful when it's played very softly. And that's also a place where many guitars fall short. When you play a lot of guitars quietly, they just sort of sound, distant and empty. So those are two things that you have to aim at when you're building an acoustic archtop guitar. So I'm going to do a little bit of history. And again, here's where you can all tell me I'm wrong. Well, I'm probably mostly not wrong, but anyway, so Orville Gibson is credited with, and I don't think there's any real disagreement about this, Orville Gibson invented the archtop guitar. Although it's important to point out that Orville, who was a very interesting man, was really fascinated with mandolins and harp guitars. And I don't think he cared that much about the six-string guitar. I think it was like, yeah, we'll make some of these too. So if you look at his output in the late 19th century, when he was hitting his stride as an instrument maker, and he was very prolific, a very gifted builder with a flair for bling. He loved mother-of-pearl inlay and stuck it all over everything. I mean, there's photographs. I decided not to do the, slideshowy thing, but there's photographs of his harp guitars that have hundreds of pieces of pearl on them. You just can't believe it. I mean, it's just a riot of shapes and things all over the place. So I'm saying he didn't seem to be that interested in guitars. And when you look at his guitars, somewhere I have these. When you look at his guitars, even in a photograph, you can tell that they don't work. Sorry. Again, one man's opinion. So if you look at the Orville guitar from the end, the arching looks like this. Whoops, well, it looks like that. Whereas a violin has this lovely thing with there's a place around the edge that can be flexible and to help promote bass response. But this looks more like a packing crate to me. I mean, it's awful design. And then the back of the guitar is just a flat piece of mahogany with the edges rolled over it. And last year I did a presentation with G.E. Smith, and he used to own one of these. And in my talk, I said something about how uninteresting these guitars were, and he pipes up, "Those are horrible," So, I mean, they really sounded. I only played one. Somebody brought one into the music store where I was working in Manhattan in the late 70s to sell, and we just didn't want it. It was, it was kind of beat up. We put new strings on it, and it just didn't do anything. So again, to be clear, the job of an acoustic guitar is to move air, right? That's the job. So if you start out with something that's really stiff, how can you expect it to be pliable and lively? It's just not going to happen. So anyway, Orville also, he did his most important contribution, of course, is in the mandolin family, where he took the old-fashioned so-called potato bug or round-back mandolins. and stepped away from those in favor of what we now consider to be a regular mandolin. So he designed those, the A and the F models, and that's pretty much, that hasn't changed. These were his original patent, which was granted in 1898, his only patent, which is actually very entertaining to read. I mean, the language at that time was really kind of, the claims are grandiose, shall we say. Yeah, his stuff is unbelievable. So, let's see. So he got involved with 5 businessmen in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where he lived then. And these were a bunch of hotshot entrepreneurs. One guy was a marketing guy, a couple of moneybags guys. And anyway, they decided that his work was interesting. Remember, he was energetic. He was heavily involved in the local music scene, pretty good musician, performed a lot. A flamboyant guy. Has anybody ever seen the photographs of this dude? He's got the hat with the feather and stuff. He's got like checks and stripes and polka dots all at the same time. It's unbelievable. So anyway, he got involved with these guys, and he was never a partner in his own company. He lent it the name. They paid him $2,500 for his patent, which was a lot of money. It converts out at about $26 per dollar. So multiply $2,500 by 26. So for him, this was a windfall. He was like, great, let's do this. So they hired the local craftsmen, which are mostly Dutch. And a lot of them are, from across the sea. And they were really trained in carpentry. I mean, there was, 100 years ago, if you worked with wood, you were either, trained or you weren't trained. And if you weren't trained, you didn't work with wood. And if you were trained, you were good. These guys could make anything. They could build you in anything. So when they started building guitars and mandolins, they hired these gentlemen who were already trained, who came in and did a pretty much bang-up job for Gibson. They made lovely instruments. The quality of the work was excellent. Materials, pretty good, not fabulous. I mean, the builders in this room probably wouldn't use a lot of the materials that Gibson used in those early days, but there was nothing to be ashamed of, certainly. I mean, the materials were perfectly fine. And the strength of the Gibson company was in its marketing acumen. The marketing guy was really a genius. I mean, what he decided to do, everybody's seen the Music Man movie, where he sells musical instruments through teachers and stuff. So that's what they did. This was the original Gibson thing, where they would go to a community with a box load of mandolins, and they'd find the music teachers, and they'd say, listen to how great these sound. Wouldn't it be great to get all your students to play mandolins, and then we could line up your whole town, and everybody would have a Gibson mandolin. And everybody was like, okay, we haven't got anything else to do. Why not? So you see all these pictures of these mandolin orchestras that go on and on and on. They're all in their Sunday clothes. They're all like, And I mean, we don't have any recordings, but can you imagine what that sounded like? And they were playing classical music and pop tunes from the day, So the Gibson Guitar Company was wildly successful with this family of mandolins, not just the mandolin, but the other versions of it, the mandola, the bigger one, the mandocello, and finally the mando bass, which had actually an end pin diagonally from the instrument to the dirt, so that you could hold, because you couldn't hold it up otherwise. I've worked on a couple of those. Those are entertaining. They sound like this. Yeah, really great. So this whole thing went on pretty well, and they made a lot of money. Meantime, Gibson, marched to his own drummer and fell out with the company pretty quickly. They considered him a difficult eccentric, and I guess he had a lot of arguments with them. That we don't know exactly what happened, but what we do know is that at one point they issued a little statement that said that Mr. Gibson would only be paid for the hours he was actually on the premises. Okay, and then the last we know of him, his involvement with the Gibson Company, is he sold his last shares of the company to his local bartender, for $60, which is in today's dollars $1,570. So, it's a little something. Anyway, so then he was out of there, and that was, I think, '06, pretty sure, '06. So his involvement was only a few years, and it's hard to tell. Having run a guitar company, I can promise you that there's no scribe in a guitar company. There's nobody that's writing down all the things that are happening, So lost to history, all of this. So Gibson went on to develop a bunch of instruments, including, here's an example of a lovely little guitar from 1918. This is an L3, so they had L0, L1, L2, L3, L4 up through the early 20s, and it's a nice little guitar with a beautiful little voice. It's not a Canon, but it's a pretty sounding, well balanced guitar, very nice, and nice to play at home. After World War I, the Gibson company had a hard time selling mandolins. The whole line of mandolin, that it just didn't stick. I mean, it wasn't magic. The sales were better than, the promises were better than the results. Then people were like, so, which is why you can find a lot of old Gibson mandolins, because they got used for a couple of years and then they went in grandma's closet or attic or something. They're still out there. Anyway, so Gibson hired Lloyd Loar, who was a virtuoso performer on the guitar, a very fine musician. And he was also, knew some things about physics and acoustic physics. So he went in there and he sold himself as the guy who was going to help them up their game. And he did. And he was only there for just a hair over 2 years, 22 to 24. He put together, and there was another gentleman that was involved whose name I'm not recalling right now. It wasn't just Lloyd, there was this other cat. But anyway, in these 2 years, they put together the L5 guitar, 1927 example is here, and also the F5 mandolin, and the master tone banjo. So kind of the foundation of all of these three kinds of instruments that we know and use today were all, the genesis of them, it's all in this really intense development period in 22 to 24. In 24, Gibson was in serious financial trouble and looking at maybe not making it. They got rid of Loar because he was, he wanted them to do things that were more expensive. The things that Loar contributed to Archtop guitar design include sensitive tuning of the plates. Okay, so he really understood something about instrument making. From a performer's point of view, he was a discerning guy, obviously great ears, knew what sounded better, did some experiments, figured out that he had to make lighter guitars with thinner parts. And indeed the instruments that he made and that were also made after he left in the 20s weigh usually between 4 1/4 and 4 1/2 pounds. So they're pretty darn light instruments. They have a lightweight metal tailpiece, just a piece of wire. That 100 years ago, everything was made out of wire. Everything. Think about it. Little tiny metal strap. A lot of times these broke. This one is not looking like it's in danger of breaking, but this was a stress point. A lot of them ripped. Here, and then this little piece of metal, which is, strong enough to not bend, just about. And then lightweight open back tuning pegs. Lightweight attachment hardware. The original ones had those, you've seen those little, actually really gorgeous, not terribly effective, but they're little clamps that grab the instrument and then have a rider that attaches to a bracket to help hold the pickguard. On the L5s and also, or maybe not the L5s, on some of their guitars at least. I'm not sure exactly which ones, and their mandolins originally were like that. And I don't know when they switched to this, but this was better and tended not to fall off. So anyway, here it is, a lovely guitar. And maybe this would be a time for us to hear Adam Miller play this guitar for a minute. No, so this is a 27. So Loar left in 24, and they recovered a little bit in their business, and this guitar was a big seller for them. How do we do this?
I'm just going to grab this still.
Okay, great.
So everyone can hear slightly.
Great. So this is a 27. A lot of us feel that this period after Lloyd Loar left was even better instruments. And by the way, they didn't, even though Loar was there from 22 to 24, they didn't ship L5s till 23. So most of the L5s were made after he was gone. Some were signed by him and command, higher price because of that feature. But most of us think, and I know George Gruen definitely thinks this, that 27, 28, 29, these were the real years. And I guess what happened, as you could imagine, is the builders that were putting these things together got more practiced at it. And this was, again, the first instrument with F-holes. This was Lloyd Loar's idea, was to put F-holes instead of a round or an oval hole like the other earlier L models. And I guess they just got better at building guitars, which we all hope to do, right? Kit?
Also, the first L5s and all the mandolins before that were made out of birch, bracket size.
Yeah, that's right.
So about 1925, they started making out of maple.
Okay.
It helped for the punch.
Right, thanks for pointing that out. That's right, I forgot about that. Yeah, the earlier instruments were birch. It was all local wood for Gibson. I mean, they didn't import anything except for ebony and rosewood. All the spruce was Adirondack, red spruce, I'll get slapped. Red spruce from the Midwest, not from the Adirondacks. I'm sorry, it was local wood, but I just said that. Local wood, and again, the material that was selected was good. There's nothing to be ashamed of, but it wasn't the wildly cuckoo great stuff where everybody's saying, no, this isn't good enough, we have to have better curl, or we have to have, the lines have to be this. They weren't worried about that. They used the wood they could get. It was a production facility. And it's important to remember that the decisions that are made in a production facility, sometimes they're not made the same way that we would make them on our own benches. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. Okay. So, have we beaten Gibson to death? Oh, yeah. Oh, so now, there's, at the end of this 20s, we have the Gibson master models, which they were looking for better wood. They had better spruce. Hey, Adam, why don't you play this guy here? Well, do you want
to hear that?
Yeah. Pretty little thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll talk about that. Big guitar, right? Yeah, let's hear it for little guitars. So yeah, they did, in the late 20s, they did this master model thing where they consciously looked for the best materials they could use. It was called the master model. And they were proud of these. There was a special label that said master model. And a measure of their success is that two of the most important early players in that decade, Maybelle Carter and Eddie Lang, both had master model L5s. Yeah, from the same batch, apparently. It was about 20 of them. So then, at the end of 1929, of course, guys were jumping out of buildings in Manhattan, and it was game over for the economy. So Gibson went, they had all this stuff they couldn't sell. they kept changing their product line to try and stay in business. You know, first it was mandolins, then, oh gee, everybody wanted to buy, you know, use a tenor banjo when they came back from the war, and, you know, then, you know, so the guitars, and so anyway, they had all kinds of stock, and they didn't really know what to do. And sadly, and I don't mean this, you know, I don't mean to be mean-spirited, but the survivalists, the bean counters, drove Gibson for the next decade. And the worst example of this is the idea of kerfed bracing. Who knows about kerfed bracing? Okay, so on the inside of, that's the wrong tool. On the inside of the Archtop guitar, to fit a brace to this surface is, you know, separates the men from the boys, because there's a little twist in it, and it's got a curve, and, you know, it curves this way, then it curves back that way. Okay, so you have to fit this thing, and this is what these Dutch craftsmen were good at. They were like, I know how to do this, and they just fit it. It just took a while, right? No more taking a while, guys. Nobody can see the brace. Just get the brace in there. You know, you got 10 minutes to get the brace in the guitar. Okay, so now you're not fitting it. Well, you're kind of sort of fitting it. And then when it's close, you take the, okay, so here's the installed brace. I did it wrong. Okay, here's the installed brace. And they just took their handsaw and they cut grooves, saw curves, I mean, through the brace like this, wherever they needed to get the damn thing to conform to the top. I mean, this is abdicating your responsibility. This is wrong. No one thinks this is right. No one thinks this is right. And then, okay, so now you have this piece of wood that's essentially this thick, right? With all this junk on top of it. So what do? You restore the beam strength. How do you do that? You take a block plane, you shoot off this surface, and then you glue a piece of crap on top. Like, whatever. Like, I've seen in a 1930 L5 that looks exactly as nice as this one, the piece of crap that they glued to cap this curved brace was a piece of curly maple veneer that was cut on a jump shear and was all busted into curly, you know, sine waves on the corners, on the edges, glued on with high glue with the drips running down the braces. Game over. Braced. So anyway, forgive me, but the Gibson guitars from the 30s cannot be counted upon. It's like they threw the book out the window. So everything that Lloyd Loar accomplished at Gibson was simply trashed. And so, yeah?
So how does that affect the sonics of the guitar?
Oh, stop it.
No, I'm not being silly. I just what's the tone?
Oh my God.
So it kills it.
This is the end of the guitar. Okay, so I wasn't going to tell stories, but here's a story. So my buddy in 1985 probably comes to my shop, and he has two of these L5s, just look exactly like this one. 1929, 1930. The 1929 guitar sounded a lot like this guitar. A beautifully balanced, powerful, lovely instrument, a lot of fun. The 1930 guitar sounded like this. It just was awful. It didn't do anything well. And you looked at them, and it looked like it was sprayed by the same guy on the same day. And the wood was the same, and the fit and finish that you could see was all the same. So we look in there with a little, now we have cameras. We looked in there with a little flashlight and mirror, and I saw what I just described to you. This crudely curved brace with a piece of, you know, sheared off curly maple veneer, sliced curly maple veneer glued on the back surface with high glue dripping all over the place. And to add insult to injury, what did that do to the sound? Okay, so here's your guitar, and then normally when you graduate, if you look, it's easy to see in my guitar, you graduate all the way out to the lining and make sure that the edges are flexible, which is really important to having your guitar sound good. But even in production, so maybe they, you know, normally Gibson would graduate out, and maybe it would leave a little flat surface out here that was, I don't know, a ½ inch wide or something around the rim of the instrument, so that they were sure of being able to glue the rims to the instrument. Okay, so this 1930 guitar was graduated in the crudest way in the center with a disc grinder with grit paper on it. Like, brah, big cloud of dust. Perfect. So we went from Lloyd Loar, who's tap tuning and cares passionately about how these things sound, to this guy who's being told it doesn't matter what you do on the inside, make him look just as good on the outside, and get him out the door. The motto was ship it. So anyway, okay.
Did they charge less?
Well, that's an. Okay, I'll pick that up. They were $175 in 1920. Yeah. And I don't think they changed their prices. And you probably know this, that Gibson called guitars by their retail price, by their manufacturers suggested.
$5 then?
Huh?
Were they $5?
Well, that was later. Yeah. That was the Super 400 or the ES 150. Yeah. Most. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so the Depression killed the acoustic Archtop guitar, like blam, killed it, done, And were there other practitioners? Epiphone didn't start shipping guitars till 28, so they weren't a big presence in the marketplace. There are probably little places. I'm not a real expert on quirky, old, kinky, tiny factories that made Archtop guitars in the 20s. Maybe there were other ones. I've seen a few things. They weren't important, at least not to me. So I don't know how to say further. But what happened was the Depression killed the Archtop, acoustic Archtop, and Gibson just kind of went into stagger through it mode. And that was that until 1932, when John D'Angelico's beloved uncle passed away. And his uncle was born in Italy, and he was a very good instrument maker, classically trained in Italy, emigrated to the U.S., where D'Angelico was born in 1904. And so in 1932, at the age of what would have been, 27 or something like that, his uncle died, and he couldn't stand working for his aunt. So he quit, and he opened a shop. And so what he did was he borrowed an L5 from the 20s, and he put it on a piece of paper, and he went like this. And he made L5s. So D'Angelico rescued the acoustic Archtop guitar, When I asked, I had a wonderful friendship with Jimmy DeQuisto. He was a very important guy in my life, and we admired and enjoyed each other's company very much. And when I asked him, so Jimmy, what are the best D'Angelicos? He goes, they're all from the 30s. He goes, they're all from the 30s, because after that fucking pickup game, I wasn't going to say that. Sorry.
We're leaving.
Then no, I mean, it's just, family friendly and all. But I after the pickup came, everything had to get heavier and heavier to try and reduce feedback. And now I'm going to say something that some of you are not going to want to hear.
Yes.
You're not going to want to hear this. But it's my opinion. Again, one man's opinion. So let's go back to Lloyd Loar. And Lloyd Loar is trying to derive goodness from understanding how a violin works, right? That's why I put in F-falls. So here's the violin bridge. Okay, and on the treble side, this is the treble side of the bridge, looking from the end pin, right? So treble side of the bridge, there's a sound post, which is pretty close to underneath the foot of the treble foot of the bridge, a little bit in back of it, but whatever. Pretty close, so that this kind of acts as a pivot point. And underneath the bass foot of the bridge is the bass bar, which is the only strut in a violin, the only strut. Fairly light brace, not quite parallel with the center line, angled out a little bit, the way you would think, gets farther away from the center as it goes into the lower bow. So when you play a violin with a bow, which is like, 99.5% of the time, the bow has a really interesting relationship with the string. What it does, let's say we're bowing in this direction, and what it does is it grabs the string and it pulls it this way, because you put rosin on it that makes it sticky, right? It pulls the string sideways, and it also rotates and rolls the string in a clockwise direction in this case. until the frictional forces overcome the coefficient of friction, and then the string unwinds and slides along the bow to wherever it goes, and then it gets picked up by the bow again. Of course, this happens many, many times a second. So the important thing to think about, for me, about what this happens is, unlike a plucked musical instrument, the bow is controlling the motion of the string in this sideways back and forth direction. The string is not really capable of doing this or anything else because it's being held by the bow, right? It's being controlled by the bow. So what happens in low frequencies especially is that the bridge moves like this. And you can, if you look it up online, you can see all kinds of cute pictures of, various ways we have of looking at this, the motion of it, and what happens with the violin top and everything. But this kind of lateral pumping is a big mode of vibration for the violin family, which is a bowed instrument. Now, how many of you think anything like this happens on an acoustic archtop guitar? Not the slightest thing like this happens. First of all, when you strike the string, it's every string for itself. It does whatever it wants. It goes here and there, and unless it's a beautifully made string in perfect condition, it has anomalies. It does all kinds of crazy stuff. As we play it, we smash it against pieces of metal, we dent it, we harden it, we change the way it responds, and it immediately strings on any guitar downhill as soon as you use them. Okay. So let's think about what happens on an archtop guitar. I'll draw it the other way. Now we have a bridge here, sitting on a top, and tailpiece in this direction, and here's the string. So what happens is we pluck a string, and the string goes sideways. So when a string goes sideways, as we all know, it raises the tension of the string, right? Just the same way we bend, it raises the pitch and the tension. But anyway, just when you set a string in motion, as it moves to one side, it raises the tension, then it comes back to center, releases, it goes back to the original tune tension, then comes back to the other side, ditto, back and forth. So the action that this is seeing is, what happens is, it's trying to rotate the top of the bridge toward the nut. That's the big mode of an archtop bridge. Has nothing to do with this. So the bridge is rocking in 90 degrees the opposite direction. So now, how much relationship do we think the archtop guitar has with a bowed instrument? How about like none? We don't have a bow. It's a whole different thing. And it's why the guitar, a properly built guitar, you have to have in your mind the whole time efficiency, because you have so little energy to work with. You have these little bitty strings, and you can only hit them so hard. You can only put so much energy into them, whereas someone with a bow can drive the string crazy till they get hungry. You could play a note all afternoon. So the archtop guitar is a completely different problem for an instrument maker than any kind of bowed instruments. And I submit, here's the part some people aren't going to like, that the acoustic archtop guitar with F-holes succeeded in spite of the F-holes and in no way because of them. Okay? And I further submit that if you build an electric archtop guitar and you want to be able to play with a drummer and you want your guitar to feed back, put F-holes in it. Yeah, that's the best, because and this in no way contributes to the so we said now the bridge is doing this, right? So what are the F-holes doing? They're allowing the center of the top to do this crazy, undisciplined feedback motion that's awful, and you can see it. If you watch carefully, it's hard to, because at some point you think the thing is just going to explode, right? But if you watch carefully at an archtop guitar that's feeding back, I submit that you can see the center of the top doing this bad thing.
So if you plug your F-holes, you're not really helping.
It's not helping. The other thing the F-holes do, sadly, the F hole effectively disable this whole part of the guitar. Now, it's not complete. You can hear a little difference. But listen to this. Okay, so this part is working. And by the way, if you don't know, that's how you tell if it's working or not. Okay, the guitar is supposed to move air. If the guitar isn't moving, how can it move air? So if you put your hand on a guitar that's vibrating and nothing happens, that means the guitar isn't, that part of the guitar is not useful. It's just not doing anything. And so it's an easy way to check as a builder, how are you doing? You know, you get the whole thing strung up, and you go like, gee, I thought I was going to get more out of this, and then you do this, and you go, oh yeah, gosh, I think it's overbraced over here, you know. Okay, so any questions about it? This is really important to me. You know, this is, yeah.
So what can you do to reduce feedback on an F-hole?
Don't put F-holes in it. You just said an F-hole guitar.
You already own the guitar.
You already own the guitar. I have no idea.
You can't really do it.
Okay, so I have it. Okay, I'll tell you one more story. 1980, I palled around with Jimmy DeQuisto for the whole weekend of the Summer NAMM show in Chicago, which was known thereafter as the Wake on the Lake. Nobody came. It was 106 degrees, and it was just miserable. And the Chicago unions made everybody was sobbing because to plug in you couldn't put a plug in a wall without 6 electricians coming down charging you $1,000. You got to be kidding me. So, yeah, you think okay. So we're palling around, and Jimmy goes, "Hey Ken, let's go hear Pat Martino play." I go, "Great, okay, great." So it's this giant convention center. We walk a half a mile down here and turn the left. And finally, we find this little room about the size of this room, in ugly, cinder block with hospital green, right? No windows. So, but in that room are Grady Tate on drums, Ray Brown on bass, Pat Martino on guitar, and Tommy Gumina on accordion. And if you haven't heard of Tommy Gumina, he's the man that started the Polytone Amplifier Company. And he plays the accordion and sounds a lot like Chick Corea. Unbelievable. So we sit down, there's 10 other guys in there. We sit down, Jimmy and I were like, yeah, this is it, So we hear this nice long set. These guys play the whole set with this huge set of grins on their faces. They're having a blast. Afterwards, Dan Armstrong, who was a piece of work, came over to Jimmy and he said, "Hey, Jimmy, hey, man, hey, Dan." So, yeah, I was just thinking about you the other day. Yeah, I have one of your guitars on my workbench. And Jimmy because he built both acoustic archtops, which never had a pickup, and then plywood, archtops, pickup equipped. And so Jimmy said, "Well, what kind of guitar did you have?" And he said, "Oh, it's a beautiful acoustic, man, 17-inch guitar. Oh my God, the thing sounded at the end." Jimmy goes, "Oh, yeah. He goes, "Yeah, the guy brought it in because it was feeding back on the gig. So somebody put a de-arming pickup on it and it was feeding back." And so Jimmy goes, "Oh, yeah. And Dan said, "Yeah, I had to epoxy 12 soundposts in it." And Jimmy lit up like a Roman candle. I had to restrain him from killing Dan Armstrong. And I was like, I'm cold. Jimmy's just teasing you. He didn't do that, So that's how you do it. According to Dan. Okay. So D'Angelico kind of brought back the acoustic archtop in the 30s. And the problem with that was that in 1935, 3 years after he was in business, Gibson released the ES-150, which had that, 4-pound L-shaped pickup in there with the magnets, like beginner magnets, that didn't work. So the pickup, I don't know if any of you have seen it, but you're familiar with how a Charlie Christian pickup looks on the outside. Well, on the inside, there's this gigantic structure that comes way down into the guitar, almost to the bridge. There's 3 big bolts. Yeah, with mammoth springs in there to try and control this giant oscillator inside the guitar that's a pickup. And in fact, a lot of people don't know this, but the inside surface of an ES 150 or ES 250 is not carved at all. It's just flat. So it's, 3/4 of an inch thick in the middle.
Is it solid screw? No.
Yeah.
It is solid.
Yeah. So anyway, so what do you think that guitar sounded like? So remember, instrument making is balance and proportion. We have to be sensitive to the flexibilities. Okay, so here's, if I could only impart one thing to, well, any group of instrument makers, really, it would be something that any engineer learns in Engineering 101, which is the stiffness of a piece of material varies with the cube function of the thickness. The cube function. So, if you have a piece of material that's, okay, flat top guitar. I know we weren't going to talk about flat tops. Flat top guitar, the top is about 1/8 of an inch thick, okay? Roughly 1/8 of an inch thick. General agreement on this. This is how much wood we need to put in there so that the bridge doesn't twist the top into, some oblivion. Okay, so now we're going to build what I consider a superior form, the Archtop guitar, way better than any flat top thing could ever be. And what we're doing is we're inducing this beautiful carved shape into this lovely material. And now how thick are we going to make it? Any ideas? Should it be thicker? No! Should not be thicker. What's that? You carve it, right. But I mean, when you're all done with it, if a flat top can survive with 1/8 of an inch of material, why would you want your Archtop guitar to be thicker than that? What would be the point of that? And now, if we think about this stiffness as the cube of the thickness, let's say you make it, twice as thick. And this has been done by credible builders. It is now 8 times stiffer. 8 times stiffer. So you can no longer think of yourself as having built a guitar. You've built a shipping container that looks really nice, But don't tell me it's an acoustic guitar, because an acoustic guitar is powerful and sensitive, has a reasonable dynamic range, and it's the most versatile kind of guitar, my opinion. Okay, so nobody wanted to hear that either, probably. So D'Angelico, okay, first of all, it's important so D'Angelico was an important piece of this whole Archtop history thing. Even though he was just one guy, supported, not at all in the first decade, and then he had Jimmy DeSario work for him, and then later Jimmy DeQuisto. He had to be named Jimmy. And so he opened his shop in 1932. He died in 1964. Last 2 years of his life were bad health. He had heart operations. Can you imagine heart operations in the early 60s? I mean, just, poor guy. So he was never really took good care of himself. He was not a robust, healthy guy. Anyway, so he died at 59. And his shop was open, so if we call it really like 32 to 62, say. So his shop was open for 30 years. And if you multiply that by 12, you get 1,500. So his shop was open for 1,500 weeks. He made around 1,200 instruments. 1,200 instruments. That's an instrument every 8-point-something days. Never dated, never married, never took a vacation, never left New York City except to go to New Jersey once for an unsuccessful business meeting. Kind of my hero, really. I mean, he was awesome. So anyway, so he passed away. He died, and the vultures came in and kind of dismembered his shop, and some lawyers that he was involved with took materials and tools that they shouldn't have taken. They were supposed to go to Jimmy DeQuisto. The whole thing was bad, and Jimmy was furious about it the rest of his life, and felt taken advantage of. Jimmy was apparently pretty easy for bad guys to take advantage of. String guys too. So 1975, I finished my first Archtop guitar, and I built an Archtop guitar because I was taking lessons with a wonderful guy who played. He had a early '40s Gibson L12, which is a dressed-up L7, 17-inch guitar, acoustic, no cutaway. It was one of the most amazing sounding guitars I have ever heard in my life. And at that age of, I think I was 21 when I started studying with him. Of course, I didn't know anything, so I didn't understand that the guitar that he had was the product of him buying, selling, trading, looking around, for decades to find this guitar, right? And so I thought, wow, Archtop guitars are great, because the rest of us are in the class trying to turn the knobs on our whatever we had to sound like him, and nobody could do it, right? So I was like, I got to get myself one of these Archtop guitars. So I got to the music stores, and I play Archtop guitars, and they sound bad. I mean, I can't find one that I love. And so I finally decided that I was going to make one. So I built one, and I called up Jimmy. I said, Mr. DeCusto, my name's Ken Parker, and I just built my first Archtop guitar, and I would be thrilled if I could visit you for a short time and get your, appraisal of my work. And he said, oh, Ken, I'm so busy. I'm so busy. Come Saturday. So Saturday, and he plays my guitar for a while, and he looks up and he says, who showed you how to make this guitar? And I said, well, you did. And he goes, what do you mean? This is our first meeting. And I said, well, in the back of Irving Sloane's book, How to Build an Acoustic Guitar, there's 6 pages called Jimmy DeCusto Builds an Archtop Guitar. Now, I read those 6 pages several hundred times, probably, studied all the pictures with a microscope, And so that's, from working on, I was repairing guitars at the time a little bit. So between working on guitars like this, because back then, nobody knew that was a special guitar, so they would bring a special guitar like that to a dumb kid like me who didn't have any experience to fix. So I got to see a lot of Gibsons and some D'Angelicos in those early days, especially. And so I kind of had a sense for what they were like. And of course, I'd done my own where's a good Archtop search and come up with nothing. So I thought, well, I'll give it a whack. And he told me that it was the best first guitar he'd ever played. Really? And on my way out the door, he called after me and said, you're crazy if you stop building guitars. And my feet didn't touch the ground for weeks. I was knighted by this guy, He says, you're a guitar maker. I was like, oh my God. So anyway, so he was great, and we had a lot of fun together, and we influenced each other a lot. Here's a guitar I made in 1977. This is my 4th Archtop guitar. And of course I couldn't wait. It was still stinky with lacquer when I drove over to Jimmy's shop and said, what do you think? And it freaked him out, which took me almost 20 years to figure that out. But here's what he told me. Ready? A use doesn't exist for this guitar. A use would have to be invented for this guitar. Too much everything. So, yeah. Jimmy loved acoustic guitars. And one of the things that we always talked about was, like when he first saw this guitar, he goes, oh, Ken, you changed everything. See, all the ideas, look at all the ideas. And a lot of these things I'm still doing. The bridge is hollow, it doesn't weigh anything. It looks inside, if you saw it inside, it looks like a tent. Really? Yeah, it weighs, 25 grams or something. And the ball that I attached the tailpiece with, I'm still using that system. Turned out to be a really great system, this little pin, which I got from the Gamba family. The Gamba family is the family of instruments, bowed instruments that came before the violin. And what they did was they glued a piece of wood in a lot like the socket for the neck in a violin. They glued a chunk of hardwood in there and cut a little groove in it, and hung the tailpiece right off there, no string. They just cut a piece of wood and hung the tailpiece right on that pin. So I thought that was a good design. Anyway, that's where that comes from. Oh yeah, this guitar. So this guitar basically was kind of the end of my early Archtop guitar making career, because this guitar I completed in 1977. And in 1977, you could buy any Gibson Archtop guitar or any D'Angelico or Stromberg guitar for between $1,200 and $2,000. And that was not enough money for a young man like me to buy materials, rent a shop, and live. I mean, at the time it took me to make a guitar, those numbers just didn't add up. So I couldn't figure out whether I was going to be an instrument maker anymore. And I finally had a talk with myself, and I said, well, you know, instrument makers throughout the centuries have built instruments for the musicians who are alive, not the ones that are dead. So why don't I make electric guitars? And that was my Parker guitar foray. Anyway, enough of that. So now in 2003, I got started on the Archtop thing again. And maybe Ash, can you give this a quick workout here? So this guitar is from 2008. So this is my third guitar of the new thinking guitars with the adjustable neck and blah, blah, blah. This guitar is made out of curly aspen. Sounds like when you're not touching it.
Right.
You know?
I didn't feel.
Okay. It's not touching his back.
Well, if I dampen it.
Yeah. The back's pretty involved, right? Okay, and so here's a guitar that's 2 days old. Yeah. This one's called Sidekick, I think. That's what it says its name is. Both of these guitars are equipped with magnetic pickups that are designed to balance output for the bronze strings that we love so much. These guitars are strung with 12 to 52 D'Addario EXPs, and the Bronzeville pickup will work equally well with 11s or 13s. You know, any regular guitar set work out great.
It's a big knob.
What's that? Oh, the magic knob. We have a volume knob here because people were complaining about knobs sticking up from the pickguard, which rightly so. For some styles, it's really in the way. And so, any of us who've ever made a guitar with a electronics in it know that the side acting pots are just a joke. I mean, they cost 11 cents to make, and we pay 69 cents for them. They're horrible. And so, this was my idea of using a really nice, robust plastic CTS pot with a bronze shaft, and then sticking a knob on it, so I have a side action knob that actually really does something. So just for the record, one more thing on that Celestial guitar that you're passing around. Kenny Burrell came to visit me in 1979 when I ran a shop in Manhattan. And he played that guitar, and he loved that guitar, and he wanted to buy that guitar. And so I set up the guitar with flat wound 12s, and with masking tape, I stuck a DeArmond pickup on it, and he played 3 nights at the Village Vanguard, of which I heard, of course, every note, and at the end offered me $1,000 for the guitar. And so I didn't know whether to, weep or just fall into a subway grate. But anyway, that was that. Oh, I did want to say, while you're laughing, I wanted to say one more thing, which is that D'Angelico, he built so quickly. This is obviously 8-point-something days. Come on. I mean, how much time is he First of all, he turned the whole building process inside out in order to build quickly. He carved and braced the inside of the guitar first. Some of you know this. Glued the guitar together. Outside of the guitar was rough, measured maybe 3/8 of an inch thick, big, horrible tool marks all over it. Yes, he did have somebody carving it, sometimes rough carving on the template following, before CNC kind of thing. And then he would then cut the binding ledge around the instrument, glue in big wads of cellulose binding with glue that he made by chipping up the binding and putting it in a jar of acetone, shaking it up and leaving it on the bench overnight. So when he put the binding in, he was sloshing acetone all over the guitar. You see pictures of these things in motion. The guitar is just covered with this white plastic crud. It's just a mess. A mess. And then he would discover the guitar within this mess. Yeah. So he would, by contrast, I do it the violin way. When I glue my plate on, it's done. It's like, I'm very happy with it, right? So the rest of his process, and DeQuisto did the same thing, is they get carved from the outside, this gigantic bunch of wood that needs to leave, and plastic all around. And, thump and push and pretend they know what they're doing, excuse me. But, and then at the end, they had no way of measuring it. And at the end, John D'Angelico, widely reported, although the number is a little different, some people report that he said 1 guitar in 4 was a good guitar. Some people report he said 1 in 5. If that was my experience, I would drive my little red car right into a tree at 100 and something. 1 guitar in 4 is a good guitar? So that shows the sacrifice that he had to make in order to survive as a business. So, everything's forgiven compared to that, right? I mean, we all who build have a living to make. Everything's a balance, everything's a compromise, but let's not do it that way. And I don't know, to me, instrument making, it's a beautiful thing to do for a living. I've had such a blast. I've made the best friends. All my friends play guitar very well, as you might imagine. I just think it's great to be part of the number. I mean, it is said by some that the earliest early stringed instruments are 7,000 years old. And certainly, we can, at which point they were maybe indistinguishable from the thing you got your dinner with, right? And then, but for me, it starts kind of around like 1100 or 1300 in the Ottoman Empire, when they start making all kinds of cool stuff that you play like this, the ouds and the balalaikas and bouzouki and the steps and all that stuff, which then kind of flowed through the Mediterranean on both sides, came together in Spain, became the lute, which is al-oud. Al-oud the oud becomes al-oud, becomes al-lud, becomes a lute, which turns into, all kinds of other pluck things and string things. And, it's a great thing to be part of this group. And in closing, I want to say that, I was very fortunate. I got to study with geniuses. I apprenticed as a tool and die maker, and I apprenticed with one of the best studio furniture makers that ever lived. And I was taught the right way and the wrong way to do things, and trained in precision is very important to me. Looking at the field right now, I feel a little frightened to see people's reliance on stuff you design on a screen, because it separates the builder from the material, and that's wrong. If you get your part coming out of a machine and you have to finish sand it and put finish on it, you don't know anything about it. If you start out with a gouge going like this, you're listening to the material. You're sizing it up. You know how crisp it is, how gooey it is. These things are meaningful, You figure out when to stop carving as a result of that. It's not just a game of numbers. And if it were my job, and I had the ability to do this, I would start a school for artisans, and hopefully some of them would become good guitar makers. But I think the craftsmanship part of it is super important. It's undeniably important, and it's kind of sad to see it kind of drift into ones and zeros. So I didn't want to close on a downer. Let me see if I can find one more good story. Oh, scale. I want to talk about scale. Does anybody argue that a short piano sounds better than a long piano? I'm done with that article. Yeah, I mean, it's all about the string. By the way, when you design any kind of vehicle that's designed to roll on a road, you start, quite literally, the designer starts with the tires that it's going to sit on, because it can't do things that the tires can't do. And same thing for us, we start with the strings. We have to build an instrument that'll flatter the best set of strings we can buy. So in a sense, that's kind of ground zero for instrument making. Can't do better than the string. All those Strad violins and Amadis and Guarneris that were made 300 years ago and more, they didn't have steel wire. And nobody plays a violin today without steel wire. So what happened? Well, there's a lot more tension in steel strings than nylon strings. Anybody that's ever put steel strings on a classical guitar knows that. And so what happened to all those precious Strads that have never been touched? Well, the tops came off. And the bass bars came out. They took out the bass bar. They put in a bigger one. They jacked up the bridge 50%. They kicked the neck angle back. They made the fingerboards longer. And it's still a Strad, right? Okay. I don't know. Okay, there's no secrets in instrument making. Actually, there are secrets. I'm spelling them differently. My secrets are spelled D-E-C-A-D-E-S. I spelled it right. Decades. It's just time at the bench. It's just time, and it's curiosity, trying to satisfy yourself. Any questions?
What's the future of the Archtop?
Oh, what's the future of the Archtop? Well, I would submit to you that that is actually my only concern, and it can be most recently expressed in this guitar that's 2 days old. And if possible, what I was hoping to do with this talk is to get people to think about Archtops in a profound way, and to help to encourage young builders to take risks and try and discover things. It's the grand tradition of instrument making is to experiment. And if you look in, you look at the books, you go to a museum, please go to museums of instruments. You see all these wacky things. You go to the Met, and there's a bunch of horns. They're displayed differently now, but there's all these crazy brass instruments. And you look at them and you go like, how would you play that? Well, somebody decided somebody could play it, and maybe there was only one, But they weren't afraid to risk failure. And that's, I guess, what I learned when I was young, is that in order to make any advancements, you have to step out. You have to risk failure. You have to make something that you think might fall apart. High-performance things are generally not overweight. Runners who are obese never win. Nobody wants a heavy tennis racket. Racing cars with lead in the trunk never win. It stands to reason. Again, balance and proportion. How much material do you need? How do you do a little? And how do you do a lot with a little? That's the job. Anybody? Thanks so much for coming and giving me your attention. And it's a real honor to address a group of archtopically guitarded people.